I don't believe any of us are truly ready for how massive the gaming catalog will be in 2025. We've got over 20 wallet-crushing releases coming out, and that's just from what's been confirmed up until now. From the biggest franchises to unique new entries, here are the biggest games coming out in 2025. And because it's such a huge year, I'm also launching a brand new giveaway for all of them starting today. The winner gets to choose both the game and the platform to play on. You just have to be a subscriber of the channel, leave a like on the video, and comment down below to enter. It's completely free, and the giveaway will run up until the end week of January, with more to follow every month after. Speaking of January, we're getting a brand new Dynasty Warriors Origins. It's been a while since we got a mainline Dynasty Warriors game, but Origin was made specifically to take advantage of the PlayStation 5 hardware, so you can expect really high enemy density the whole time. I believe that 10,000 soldiers was thrown as a number at one time by Omega Force, so it definitely looks really impressive. But Origins also makes a change in the retelling of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, in the sense that it only covers like the first half, but it's a lot more thorough. If the demo they had before showed anything, is that keeping your allies' morale up enough is a big challenge in and of itself, so you can't just run straight into the battle. Also, some of the bosses were a lot more difficult, which is always a plus for me. I do like a challenging fight, but luckily you can make huge upgrades for weapons. You can get weapons pretty much in the middle of the fight. You can change between them on the fly. They also feature extensive skill trees, and from everything I've seen so far, it seems like it's the best version of any Dynasty Warriors game we've got so far. But February already kicks off in a big way with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The first one was known for its pretty hardcore RPG mechanics, methodical combat, and deep historical narrative, while the sequel continues from where that left off, but the devs just cranked up the meter on everything to 100. Namely, the game world will be twice as big, but will also feature almost no loading screens, except for when starting the game out or when changing the map. The combat also gets refined with new animations and more intuitive controls. Also added more weapon variety, including crossbows and firearms, with more emphasis on aggressive playstyle, while still retaining its realistic approach. But there's also new stuff like new crafting skills, such as blacksmithing, along returning ones, such as the alchemy. What's interesting is that the crime and judgment system also gets a nice revamp with some exciting new features, and from the looks of it, it's going to be a lot more historically accurate. They've even added physical punishments with longer lasting effects on your character, which sounds really interesting. But witnesses can also remember you now, and NPCs will generally be way more reactive than in the first game. Also, the studio promised a story with deeper, darker themes, challenging the player moral choices with significant consequences. The first game also had some major decisions that influenced certain quests and even some characters, but in the sequel, yeah, we're gonna be getting a lot more of that and a story that features multiple endings. Unfortunately, no direct carryover because only some of the skills from the first game will be retained in the second, and we'll also get to start our journey with new equipment and stats, but the devs did mention that there are ways in which the game will acknowledge our progression from the past. Right after this, we're going to get Civilization 7. Firaxis has been making some drastic changes over here, some beloved by the fans, others maybe not so much, but it's definitely a bold new take nonetheless. On one side, you don't just get to play with a single civilization in any given playthrough any longer. Instead, the game now features a three-age structure: Antiquity, Exploration, and Modern Age, where each civilization is exclusive to a specific age. On the other hand, leaders can now also be selected independently of civilizations, which can allow for a greater degree of strategic flexibility, especially now that the tech and the culture trees have also been a bit more streamlined. And most, if not all, features exclusive to the DLCs in the previous Civilization game will be added to the default one in 7, such as natural disasters and many more. Plus, there's a new mechanic called crisis events when transitioning from one age to the next, which lets you adopt new policies, but also introduce new negative effects and challenges. Besides that, districts will now be split into urban and rural, with limited building slots early on, but with the possibility of unlocking more as you progress. Also, builders are gone. Instead, you can now expand your city with new districts from the city management screen as your population grows, and many others that will probably make you really eager for Civilization 7, especially since now we also have a return to its more realistic art style. But moving on, speaking of resources and survival mechanics, we have Dune Awakening. Now, the popularity of the Dune franchise has undeniably reached all-time peaks, and Funcom, the Norwegian video games developer and publisher, is definitely capitalizing on that with this upcoming open world survival MMO, except that this is set in an alternate timeline and almost a decade after the events of the 2021 Dune movie. But being set on the same planet of Arrakis, this game will feature all the hallmarks of a survival video game. It has a crafting and a shelter system, resource managing like water reserves and heat stroke mechanics, even skill trees, and a character creation that lets you choose your appearance and even origin story. The planet, while mostly a desolate desert, will indeed feature microbiomes and caves to build shelters in. But dangers are lurking everywhere, from sandstorms you need to shelter from, to scavengers camps that you can raid for supplies, all the way to sandworms that can quite literally devour you, all of which in the process will cause you to lose all gear. And yes, there's also PvP, so players and other folks out there is another factor you have to worry about, or conversely also go ahead and join with. Interesting is that you can craft flying vehicles and also use thumpers to summon sandworms, so this is going to open up a whole bunch of possibilities, especially when PvPing or raiding somebody's shelter. It doesn't stop here though. We also have Avowed, first announced during the Xbox Game Showcase back in 2020. Avowed is a primarily first-person fantasy action RPG from Obsidian Entertainment, and actually the company is on a roll in 2025. They don't just get to launch Avowed, but also Outer Worlds too. However, Avowed is set in the same universe as Pillars of Eternity. The story sends us to the living lands of Yora to investigate a mysterious plague known as the Dream Scourge. Just like Obsidian's previous work, Avowed is rich in narrative and will focus on dialogue options with profound consequences, as well as huge mix of action combat that involves the use of melee weapons, magic, and yes, even firearms. There's actually multiple skill trees that will facilitate much of that, though I wasn't keen too much at first on using magic in a first-person game. However, early previews were quite positive, plus there's also a third-person mode. The highlight here is that you're not constrained to one single playstyle, although that is still an option, but you can go ahead and have a complete freedom to mix and match spells and weapons however you see fit. It's not going to be open world, mind you, but will feature large open zones, different biomes, and will feature a rewarding exploration. Side quests and NPCs are also quite abundant, with many choices involving them. While romancing won't be a thing here, unfortunately, there are several companions to join the player's party, even featuring their own questlines and personality of whom you can influence by the decisions that you make during these moments. Of course, we can't talk about February without also mentioning Assassin's Creed Shadows. After going through a pretty rough early gameplay reception and a launch delay, Ubisoft's decision to wait for more bug fixes and general polishing, removing the battle pass, and even giving the expansion for free is probably the best way they could have handled the situation. But controversies aside, there are some significant changes here that are worth mentioning. Namely, stealth gets boosted with a new lighting engine that lets you take advantage of lights and shadows to more dynamically affect enemies' visibility. Assassinations also get an upgrade too, plus they've added a prone mechanic for the first time, giving you a wider range to sneak around and perform assassinations. Speaking of that, much of the AI has also seen big improvements. Enemies are more suspicious now after failing to remain hidden. Patrols also get new tactics, and certain enemies can even have unique combat behaviors, such as samurai who can deny assassinations or move away from your ninja tool tricks. Also big improvements to immersion via the removal of the Eagle Companion, meaning that you need to now scout and observe on your own instead of drone marking every enemy in the camp. Furthermore, the game will feature different seasons as the story progresses, which will feature new weathers but also unique combat and stealth opportunities. And finally, the return to the two protagonist formula seems interesting too, since Naoe and Yasuke both have vastly different playstyles and skill trees, so you can choose to play either as a nimble shinobi or a stronger but slower samurai. The game seems to offer a lot of ways to handle this, including choosing which character should tackle the missions ahead. Moving on though, we also have spin-offs. Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is one of them, spin-off to the Like a Dragon series, Taking place 6 months after the events of Infinite Wealth, the story follows Goro Majima as the leading role. After getting stranded on the island near Hawaii and having lost his memories, he now leads his own pirate crew to discover hidden treasures. Now, the game does feature new and returning combat modes. One is the returning Mad Dog style, utilizing speed, agility, and flair to deliver precise yet powerful blows that stun your enemies into submission. Also, the newly added Sea Dog style, which is a combat style using dual-wielding short swords and pistols, as well as a whole arsenal of pirate tools to take down your enemies. Outside of regular combat, players will also get to assemble their own pirate crew and explore the open seas on their own pirate ship, which I think is where I'm gonna spend most of my time in. And yes, naval combat will also be a thing. You don't just get to engage in combat with other ships, but there's also even more upgrades to make your own ship much better. It's very interesting to see how this game came out to be simply because the team did not want to waste the Hawaii location in just one game, but so far the premise looks really interesting and fun. Now, February will finish off with a bang thanks to Monster Hunter Wilds. I don't think this even needs an introduction at this point, but if I learned anything from the recent beta is that Capcom really took the Monster Hunter series to whole new heights with this. First of all, the game is now fully open world and the core gameplay loop has been massively bumped in quality of life because of it. Just the fact that you don't need to return to the camp after finishing an expedition adds so much in terms of quality of life over here. Add to that the fact that the world genuinely feels alive, the creatures will dynamically spawn, dynamically get affected and influenced by weathers, and even apex predators spawning in more often as the inclemency moves in just makes the world feel so dangerous but so rewarding. Also, combat feels more refined than ever. Most weapons got a few extra moves designed to cover drawbacks they previously had, such as, for example, having focus strikes, which feel absolutely fantastic and also natural to the combat flow. Besides that, the character creation looked really good. You also get the Sacred Mount, which absolutely helps a ton in open world exploration. You can now also have 2 separate sets of weapons that you can freely switch, especially in combat, and much more. Really, some of these challenges over here are very fun and complex, and I cannot wait to see more of this game on February 28th. March will also get to see Split Fiction, developed by the same studio behind It Takes Two and published by EA. Split Fiction is an upcoming action-adventure game with a co-op multiplayer. As with previous entries from the studio, this was also designed with split-screen co-op in mind, so you have to join another player either in local or online play. In this one, the protagonists Zoe and Mio are trapped inside their own stories and will need to overcome numerous challenges to escape, one being drawn in a fantasy story while the other in a science fiction, which I find to be such a cool and interesting concept. The concept here sounds really good and the art style, like I said, is top-notch in terms of quality. Besides third-person gameplay, it's also going to feature many puzzle sections as well as moments of combat and also some narrative thrown in the mix, but there's also going to be side objectives for us to complete. Now, later on, we also get the first Berserker Khazan, a brand new single-player action RPG launching on March 27th and published by Nexon actually. It's a combat-rich experience with a very unique visual style and a combat-rich gameplay that blends a monster hunting mechanic with a darker narrative. In this, you play as Khazan, a former general framed for treason and banished to the snowy mountains, with the setting being in a fictional medieval city somewhere in Europe. We are actually getting an open beta on January 16th if you want to go ahead and check it out, but man, do I love these games that really bring something unique to the table. This one just has this really cool cel-shaded, almost anime look that combines really well with the dark fantasy. Now, it is going to be a Souls-like game, so it takes heavy inspiration from that, including the addition of an exhaustion mechanic, but it can also be very useful against enemies. And now there are various weapons to choose between that offer different playstyles. We've seen dual axes, great swords, spears, but there are probably a few more. The game also features big RPG elements, including a loot and gear system, alongside a skill tree to enhance and provide new abilities. The map design also seems rather linear, with separate map structures that oftentimes feature a boss at the end of them. First Berserker Khazan offers a lot in terms of side content, including side quests, merchants, and much more. Speaking of fun, in March we also get the first big early access for Inzoi, the first actual response to the Sims series, especially since EA is hellbent on not stopping milking that old cash cow that is Sims 4 by this point, and refusing outright to release Sims 5. But namely, Inzoi focuses a lot more on hyper-realism, and it's on a completely different scale, leaving aside the graphics engine, which is Unreal Engine 5, already making the game looking great. We're talking here about a fully simulated series of communities, with every individual person having their own lives, leading to unexpected events like rumors, trends, and even illnesses. I mean, the game even gives you control over the level of friendliness and safety a given city can have. Also, the level of customization is on a whole other scale over here. We're talking about hundreds of options for your character alone, for the building assets. I mean, they even use AI so you can generate your own textures in case you really want something on demand. Besides that, the game also features a narrative, which yes, is quite unique, and it's also open world, which means it features functional cars that our Zois, as they are calling them, can actually use. Plus, you can follow them at any time. Things happen in the city. There's also a reputation system at play called karma, so this is going to get influenced by your past actions. It genuinely looks like a true next-gen Sims that we've never actually had up until now. Now, while technically not like the biggest of game, it's definitely unique, so I think it's worth mentioning. We have Clair, Obscur, Expedition 33. This is an upcoming dark fantasy RPG that looks quite similar to that of Baldur's Gate 3, but with a combination of maybe Final Fantasy and a bit of Persona series. It definitely seems like there are some heavy hints being taken from there, and even the developers have said so. But in terms of the gameplay, this just looks so freaking amazing. You don't just have like the turn-based combat, but apparently there's also some of these quick time events that can trigger both during attack and during defenses, on top of the fact that the art style and the overall mood is like just so uniquely good looking. I cannot wait to actually get my hands on this and play it. And the thing that really caught my attention here is that the developers are not afraid of you creating broken builds. In fact, they highly encourage you to create overpowered game-breaking builds. Every weapon comes with potentially multiple passive abilities. Also, armor as well as firearms can grant your whole squad brand new skills, so it really sounds like you can create something really cool. Plus, you can master these for even more bonuses as you complete fights, as you have them equipped. So it definitely sounds like a lot of synergies can work over here and creating these really awesome ways of tackling challenges, but in your own way, even if that's a broken way of doing it that may completely bust the game up, but I'm all up for it. Moving on next, we can talk about these sort of indie projects without also mentioning Subnautica 2, though at this point, selling over 6 million copies with the first game. Technically, I think that it goes beyond that, but we've seen a new trailer. The reveal trailer shows some incredible potential over here, further on what the first game was doing already with even more cool new elements. One is the addition of online co-op with up to 3 friends to both build together and explore the mysterious new world. Yes, this is going to be a completely new setting for us to jump in, which also helps because base customization is getting totally overhauled with new tools, more customizable parts, and also more new recipes. The first trailer also teased some new dangers. We've seen currents and vortexes pulling you deeper into the ocean. Also, what looks like a new type of vehicle that hasn't been present in the first game before, nor its DLC, and possibly way more dangerous creatures. We've even seen giant crustaceans, but also returning leviathans. Overall, it looks highly promising and likely the next big step for a game that's been so defining for the whole survival genre. Also coming out next year, we have Ghost of Yotei, the next entry from Sucker Punch following the Ghost of Tsushima back in 2018. This one is set 300 years after those events in 1603 Edo period and features Atsu, a wandering female warrior, as the protagonist. As the name implies, the game setting is around Mount Yotei, situated in the northern part of Japan, modern-day Hokkaido. And given its historical significance, it's likely that the story will focus on the Ainu culture and the subsequent conquest of the northern island in the 17th century. Combat-wise, it's likely we're going to get some big changes. We've even seen some of them in action, such as Atsu being capable of dual-wielding katanas, but there's also the introduction of firearms like early versions of muskets around this time, so yes, those are also on the table. Plus, it seems that there's going to be more agency in terms of story choices this time around, and likely maybe even multiple endings, and possibly also romance options, but not much of that has been confirmed up until now. All in all, it looks pretty clear that Sucker Punch is looking into making this into its own series, the Ghost series as they've said, with many more entries coming out even after Yotei. Of course, while we're at it, we also have to talk about the new Fable 2025 reboot. Yes, it is a complete reboot, graphics engine and all, being developed by Playground Games, the same creators behind Forza series, plus some of the original devs following the closure of Lionsgate Studios almost a decade ago. But the game is pretty much developed on the same game engine as Forza Horizon, and the latest trailer showcased a mix of swordplay combat as well as archery, suggesting that there's going to be a return to real-time combat, but it's likely that some of the staple features of the franchise will also make a return. While not officially confirmed, the series is also best known for blending action RPG with strong emphasis on player choices, affecting things all the way to your character appearance. So I would still love to see our characters looking way more evil or turning good as we make these choices, all the way to looking like an angel figure or even like one of these really cool looking devils as you make all of these during the main story. But besides the morality system and player choices, also expect a rich narrative with a lot of whimsical humor and satire-rich themes. Now, technically, we also didn't see a character creation, nor has any of the footage shown a different set of protagonists, but knowing the Fable series, I find it highly unlikely that they won't go with that. I mean, it would just be a massively wasted opportunity. But there are many other RPG elements that made Fable great, like weapon upgrades, character leveling, skill development, magic spells, pretty much the definitive RPG, so at least that's what I'm expecting. Hopefully nothing goes wrong until then. Now, 2025 also marks the year we get a new Death Stranding game, you know, the game where you get to play Amazon delivery with a side of paranormal absurdities. Well, it was undoubtedly a unique experience when it first launched. Now we have the sequel, which is way more ambitious and on a different scale. So Death Stranding 2 on the beach will continue the story of Sam, Fragile and Higgs, with special new appearances from Alan Fanning and the likeness of George Miller, plus a few more on top. The core of the gameplay, which is mainly action-adventure, continues to focus on delivery missions and building connections across a ravaged world. However, there are some bigger emphasis on action elements this time around. So we've seen hints of a lot more gunplay from the trailer and also more violent encounters compared to that of the first one. The story also takes us to new places, new continents, and new geographical regions for us to explore. And speaking of new regions, also new vehicles designed to traverse them, which seems really smooth from the trailer so far, and they also seem really awesome, so I cannot wait to actually play it. Besides that, Kojima Production also has one of the best motion capturing in any video game I've seen, and they've fully taken advantage of that in the new photoshoot event feature, during which you can make characters to interact with one another and with the camera in cool ways. And apparently this is also going to have some story implications if you take advantage of it, so definitely something to maybe build your connection to the other characters along the way. But speaking of weird and unconventional, there's also Hell Is Us, developed by Rogue Factor and led by the same art director behind Deus Ex Revolution and Mankind Divided. The game takes great inspiration from the 2018 movie called Annihilation. Going for a similarly yet very welcomed in these times darker tone, Hell Is Us is an action-adventure game that combines hack-and-slash combat with semi-open world environments and a very hands-off approach when following quest objectives. The main narrative features Rami, our protagonist, who abruptly decides to venture in the fictional war-torn European country of Hedaya to find his parents, only to discover the region has become infested with supernatural beings following a mysterious event named the Calamity. The gameplay features an interesting combination of medieval weapon combat using swords, polearms and axes, supernatural powers, and a drone to further help out both in combat and exploration. You can pretty much think of this as the gameplay from Jedi Survivor, with the darker tone from the Soul series and a splash of detective work from the Batman Arkham games, and you pretty much have Hell Is Us. Now, 2025 is also a big year for shooters, and we have quite a few of them announced, but few are quite up there with Doom: The Dark Ages. Making the 8th entry in the Doom series, this is a prequel to Doom 2016 and features a more techno-medieval setting as we get to experience the epic cinematic origin story of Doomslayer. And yes, this absolutely comes with a Doomslayer cape as well. but the trailer shows us ravaging demons through burning castles, almost dark fantasy-like forests, as we yet again rip through endless hordes of hell demons with new enemies, new weapons, but also returning ones. Like, it's very hard to look at a game that lets you fight a dragon with a shotgun and not think this is incredibly cool to look at. I mean, id Software just knows how to make banger shooters, and that's exactly what I'm expecting. I mean, this one also features a saw shield that you can use to rip enemies to shreds, throw it, block with it, even bash the ground with to unleash powerful shockwaves. Looks extremely fun, and I cannot wait to see more of it. Speaking of gruesome kills and prequels, Gears of War is also getting one. A prequel to the original Gears of War, Yotei, is set to release on Microsoft Windows and the current gen Xbox. It's set 14 years before the events of the original, but Yotei brings back young Phoenix and Dominic, who must survive the Emergence Day, in which a race of subterranean creatures known as the Locust Horde emerges from their underground lair and overwhelm the surface world of Serra. Leaving aside basic descriptions, the game will now feature an entirely new city called Kelowna. Also, some major enemy redesigns as well, like Locust drones getting a much more intimidating form this time around. Also, a larger focus on horror from the looks of it, but unlike the recent Gears of War games, Yotei will instead be more linear and focus more on the origin story. That doesn't mean that the modern story gets abandoned, it's just that the team felt creating an origin story was an opportunity too good to miss, so we pretty much got Yotei. Now recently we also got the Borderlands 4 trailer. The art style is pretty similar to that of Borderlands 3, but with some added graphical upgrades to shadows, lighting and textures. So obviously that was expected, but there's also a new location moving away from Pandora to a whole new planet called Kairos. Now this is a lot more open. Randy Pitchford said in the latest interviews that everything we're seeing is a playable space that we can go to and reach without loading times, though he didn't want to use the term open world here, rather that it's seamless and expansive. So this makes me think of maybe God of War, for example, that still let you see and traverse seamlessly to other areas, but obviously they were a bit more linear, so still not open world. But we also have a first look at our 4 new Vault Hunters. Now, I'm not going to lie, they look a bit generic, but only time will tell if they are definitely more unique than the ones in 3. However, they do have their own move styles. So we have the tank over here doing a slam, we have the melee character that can also use axes, one fire and one ice. We also have the siren, and yeah, pretty much you can see them right here. They look definitely interesting, but one thing to note is that all of them will get a grappling hook, which you can use both at traversal as well as in combat. This should definitely open up some new possibilities in there. Speaking of traversal, we also have new vehicles. In this case, some of the trailer shots hint towards the possibility of them being summonable anywhere instead of having to grab them at vehicle stations, but again, only time will tell. Now moving on, next we have a new Mafia game coming out in 2025, a new entry in the series. Old Country goes back to its roots, actually a prequel to the Mafia series. The story is set to happen in the early 1900s Sicily, in the fictional town of San Celeste, previously also featured in Mafia 2, I believe, and it is based around the origins of the Mafia organization. Now, the new December trailer called Initiation features a first look at our protagonist, Enzo Favara, being sworn in to join the Torrisi crime family. The gameplay depicts both close-range melee and gun-based combat, likewise high-speed quote-unquote vehicle chases and also horseback riding. There's a big emphasis on visual fidelity here as well, with a period authentic depiction of Sicily's clandestine underworld and sun-drenched Mediterranean scenery. This is yet another game being developed on Unreal Engine 5, and Hangar 13 is keen on capturing something unique with this prequel. And I mean the whole vibe, from the visuals, the story, and even the characters, but especially the music. It really captures that mood perfectly. I mean, there's even references of the Godfather movies in here if you really pay close attention to some of these scenes. Now, the game will be more narrative driven and linear like Mafia 1 and 2, rather than more open world oriented how it was in Mafia 3. So it's likely when going from one objective to the next, this is when we can kinda maybe free roam around unless the game opens up in some way a bit later on. Also, recently it's been announced there's going to be an option for voice acting in Sicilian to offer more authenticity, and if that's the case, I mean, that's likely how I'm going to play on my first walkthrough. Now at number 16 we have Crimson Desert. We've seen hours upon hours of this, first revealed in 2019 but only recently has Pearl Abyss put out a launch window for late 2025, but what started initially as a prequel to Black Desert Online turned into its own standalone game, a fully fledged open world, completely single player action RPG. Now in this you're going to be playing as Cliff Macduff, this very Jon Snow looking character, which also is the leader of a band of mercenaries called the Greymanes. Now the game is set in the medieval fantasy world of Pywell, who's been thrown into chaos following the apparent death of its king and an impending catastrophe that we have to avert. The highlights here are the combat, obviously, heavily borrowing from Pearl Abyss's previous game. It's highly flashy, features a lot of combos, and it's highly impactful. But unlike PDO, Crimson Desert doesn't feature a character creation, nor does it seem to have a class selection. Instead, Cliff plays in a more warrior-specific gameplay, wielding a sword and a shield, but he does have access to other tools, including bow and arrow, even firearms from some of the teases, various unique combat moves that use a resource called Spirit, as well as daggers for assassination. But despite this, various gameplay mechanics show boss weapons that can change the playstyle significantly, offering new powers completely, like for example, charging up your weapon with lightning and then unleashing that against enemies. However, that doesn't paint the full picture because it seems we can also recruit other companions via the story and other quest lines, which offer massively different playstyles. We've seen a couple of them, including this one that has a two-handed axe as a playstyle and another one that's a lot more nimble and also features a one-handed rapier. The game world itself also appears massive, featuring a diverse set of biomes from green forests to red crimson deserts, no pun intended, all the way to snowy tundras and cold mountain peaks. But exploration here is going to be made much better with a combination of gliding powers, horseback riding, and yes, even dragonflight, with the latter of course being usable in combat or at least in some kind of siege missions. From the recent trailers, looks very fun and pretty much like the definitive open world RPG that borrows literally every big feature from every big open world game we've had pretty much in the past decade. Plus, there's quite a few survival mechanics in there too, such as crafting, cooking, and even resource collecting. Moving on next, we have Elden Ring Nightreign. Now this is a completely standalone 3-player co-op PvE with some roguelite thrown in the mix. FromSoft has a very interesting take on this too, combining features from genres that you don't normally see getting mixed. So it's like they took Elden Ring, Ghost of Tsushima Legends, and added a bit of Battle Royale in the mix, except versus boss enemies. So here you get to play in an alternate version of Limgrave in a 3 in-game day cycle to prepare for a final boss, all while the playable areas continue to shrink each day, pretty much forcing you to fight against a final boss each day, all the way to the biggest one to the 3rd day. Now there are some drastic changes over here. The gameplay is going to be a lot more fast-paced. You have grappling mechanics to jump over obstacles, plus there are 8 new classes in the game, a bit more defined than they used to be in Elden Ring. The difference is that you no longer have access to a character creation, instead you pick between 8 of these new heroes. But they also have timer-based skills like ultimates, which look really interesting, including this dive bomb mechanic from one of them. A big part of every roguelite is also the meta progression. Yes, each run starts at level 1, but you're going to still work towards a bigger overarching progress, including a main narrative that opens up new areas and bosses, as well as extra bonuses that apply to your character so that each subsequent run will be much better and you will also feel much stronger. Unfortunately, no 2-player co-op. It's either 3-player via a matchmaking system or via an invite-based mechanic. But yeah, hopefully at some point we're going to get a duo mode. I think that there's no reason not to add that. Price-wise, we're gonna get something likely close to Shadow of the Erdtree, so around 40 USD, but it hasn't been confirmed fully just yet. Anyway, let's keep on going with Marvel 1943 Rise of Hydra. First revealed back in 2021, it's a new action-adventure from Skydance and Marvel. And Marvel has one of the highest potentials when it comes to awesome gameplay, but man, has the franchise been mismanaged recently. Hopefully Rise of Hydra won't fall into the same trap, and yeah, right now it looks quite promising. On one side, it's based on the 2010 Captain America and Black Panther flags of Our Father series, which features the two heroes initially starting as rivals, but then will team up to take on Hydra during the World War II occupied Paris. Although the game will also feature other regions like Wakanda and a few other playable areas that are currently undisclosed. It's also interesting to see the dynamic between the young Steve Rogers and that era's Black Panther, grandfather of T'Challa in this case, Azuri, who is also a playable character, mind you. So this dynamic looks interesting, and it gets further emphasized by the game's focus on hyperrealism. I mean, just looking at this, it's developed in Unreal Engine 5.4, and it really shows some of these facial animations right here, and the motion capturing is just straight up movie-like. Moving on to number 20, we have Outer Worlds 2, a standalone sequel to the 2019 one. 2 will be twice the size of the first game, features a new solar system, a new cast of characters, more weapons, better visuals, and of course, an even bigger focus on action. In fact, it seems that a lot of the feedback from the first game has been taken into account over here. The story revolves roughly around rifts potentially destroying a colony during a war between factions, as the player assumes the control of a new protagonist, an Earth Directorate agent. And from the looks of it, the gameplay structure follows similarly to that of the first one, maybe with some added new additions. You can build your character with the abilities and choices that reflect your playstyle the best. We've also seen the combat gameplay and new weapons looking really good actually. Maybe even some of the enemy reactivity looking a bit better than before. Also, the colony will react to your every move, crafting a narrative that's yours to own according to the description. Whether you're a disciple of diplomacy, an astute strategist, a crusader for chaos, or something different altogether. Yes, this also includes being completely dumb. So it looks like there may be more agency when it comes to story, outcomes, maybe even companions. Speaking of them, it seems that we can actually shape how they progress in the game via their side stories, either to give in to their ambition or steer them towards your own objective, which may or may not even lead towards them dying basically. Now there's one more game we haven't covered, which is Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Basically, the only reason I am not fully covering this is because it's not going to be guaranteed to launch in 2025, but it's still a remake of the original, and it's been chosen as such because of its status on the origin story and of course its pivotal character for the story of the franchise. But this retains the core gameplay mechanics first implemented in Metal Gear Solid 3 and refined from the foundation of previous Metal Gear Solid entries. Gameplay additions from prior iterations of the title include the ability to crouch walk and use firearms in third person. Also, there's lots of quality of life features and graphical advances. Any physical damage such as cuts and bruises inflicted on Snake are now reflected permanently in real time across his body throughout the game's duration, as a way to illustrate your progression and individual playthrough with that character. Also, object permanence will be a thing, so now stuff like, for example, falling leaves will remain on Snake's gear, so if you like crawl across stuff, that's going to stick to you. Also, mud and dirt patches will leave stains on the clothing and they will remain over there. Even like tears and bullet holes after the player has been taking damage will be permanent. Delta will also feature two distinct play styles you can choose between. One is the new style, which basically features the more contemporary action scheme from the recent Metal Gear Solid entries, while incorporating a third-person camera. And then there's also the legacy style, which reproduces the classical controls and gameplay, as well as the overhead view with a fixed camera, much like in the original version. But anyway, last but not least, obviously we have to talk about the biggest of them all. We have Grand Theft Auto 6. While technically not officially announced yet for 2025, a release date for fall 2025 was in the plans according to the last financial report. It's hard to believe it's been over a decade since the last Grand Theft Auto came out, but somehow that doesn't make me feel old. If anything, quite the opposite given how much anticipation there is for this game. Even like looking at GTA, it's just like on a whole different scale. The story brings us back to modern day Vice City and the surrounding Florida-based fictional state of Leonida. Yes, the map size will be much bigger even than that of GTA 5's. Following the story of a new set of protagonists, a criminal duo of Lucia, and currently an unofficially named male character that we learn from the leaks to be named Jason. In the trailer, Lucia appears to have a criminal background as she's being shown appearing in a prison uniform, but later on we can see multiple scenes with both of them robbing convenience stores and running from the cops. But this franchise is highly known for its heavy satirical take and depictions on contemporary American culture. Already we can see some of those in the trailers, filled with modern age references, memes, and yes, even social media influencer culture. So I'm really like looking forward to see how Rockstar Games is taking on this, given all the circumstances right now with a lot of people being way too oversensitive about literally everything. But if there's anything Rockstar Games have proven in the past is that they aren't afraid of doing any of that, and even more so, how insanely detailed and how much quality they put in their game. Like the first trailer already, which broke literally every single record in terms of viewership in its first week, shows beaches filled with tourists, an insanely packed cityscape, high-rise apartments, new vehicles, all the way to bayous filled with gators and other creatures, as well as a bunch of other places to visit. I mean, it just looks like a really awesome combination between everything they learned from GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. Anyways, these are 20 or so of the biggest games coming out in 2025. Not all of them are in this list. Obviously, there are a few more, either with unconfirmed release dates or on a smaller scale. So if you want to also see more of them, let me know down below in the comments, and I'm also going to cover them in a separate video. In the meantime, this is pretty much it with the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.